Incremental greetings, this is Incremental, also known as William Palace. Today I have one big question. Is SuperMemo super difficult? And I think this question is difficult to answer. So that's an irony by itself. In this video, I will try to answer this question with the idea to provoke thoughts and brainstorm on your mind. So it's not a secret that SuperMemo, learning how to use SuperMemo, it's a long journey. But I want to point out that being long doesn't imply difficult, complex. It could happen that something takes long in the sense of a big time commitment, yet it's very simple. For instance, a jigsaw puzzle. It's very easy to master the process, how it's done. Yet it can take very long to finish a jigsaw puzzle. These are the questions I'm asking myself to answer if SuperMemo is difficult. And I will be tackling each one of those questions individually. So let's start. How can we objectively assess SuperMemo difficulty? That's one big question I cannot fully answer. Because you know that difficulty is subjective. It depends on the individual. For any task, as driving. Driving in mud, it's not the same as driving in the city, right? Or dancing. For me, dancing is pretty difficult because I lack the rhythm. And so on and so on. So is there any sort of measurement we can use to determine, okay, SuperMemo is that difficult? It's harder than to learn brain surgery, for instance. SuperMemo has been around for a very long time. Actually, as long as I have been living, and I am on my 30s. Difficulties with SuperMemo is the documentation of it. There are so many articles, very well written articles, very condensed, extensive, detailed, that includes answers to frequently asked questions across all the years. But it has been around for that long that there's documentation that it's plain outdated from the 90s. So that's the sheer volume of information. Take, for example, SuperMemopedia. There are more than 5,000 pages. So for me, SuperMemo could be hard, difficult for a newbie, just for the volume of information, because you don't just open the app and start using it. You have to know how to use it. And this could be overwhelming, like a library full of books. Very interesting books, I don't argue that. But it will take you time to read them. You will have to select which books to You will also need to select the books you want to read, the most useful. The ones are outdated, the ones that are relevant, which book you need to read before another one. Because you need the basics to build up the basics, then you can move on to more advanced stuff, and so on and so on. And my analogy is like on a forest, especially a very dense forest, where there are so many trees, instead of books, trees, that you can have difficulty to see the sunlight, or even the way you have to go, the path you're going through. You know there's a way, but it becomes hard to see it with so many trees in between. And let's take, for instance, you're new to SuperMemo. You are just curious and open some tabs and you see that there are hundreds of possible graphs and plots, 3D plots, and even 4-dimensional plots. One of the things that SuperMemo implemented is the level of the user interface. It's meant to be used on professional, but you have beginner, basic, so you get used incrementally to SuperMemo. That's a way to tackle the initial daunting feeling of SuperMemo. But for me, that doesn't make the cut. Because what it's doing is just hiding information from you. It's not making it simple. It's showing less information. That's actually not the same. Because SuperMemo, it's a superpower, I think, in my opinion. It's not something easy to acquire. You need time, it's something complex, and you have to build this incrementally. Just as the martial arts, you need training, training, and training. You become stronger, faster, you build up more endurance. But yet again, this doesn't happen overnight. So I'm asking myself another question. Is this proper exposure to spaced repetition software mitigates the SuperMemo difficulty? Because in the 80s, when SuperMemo was born, that was it. Only SuperMemo existed. But later on, more apps have been introduced. Anki, Nemosine, and lately even software as a service. So my question is, how different it is to start SuperMemo from scratch? And how is to start SuperMemo being used to spaced repetition software, like Anki would be in my case? I guess previous exposure makes it less difficult. That will be my hypothesis. What do you think? I did flashcards, I got used to the Q&A, to the close deletions, formulation of knowledge, and so on. But it's just a fraction of the part reading. There's no incremental reading, and so many stuff. But it's like a kickstart. You don't start from zero. Now, I have yet another question. Is SuperMemo 18 harder or easier to learn than previous versions? SuperMemo has so many versions across the years, and each version have been introducing new stuff. For instance, last version, 17, I think, introduced concepts. And even though incremental reading was not on SuperMemo 1, so that was introduced into 90s. And incremental video, and so on, and so on. So each time a new user, if it starts with the current version, there's more stuff to learn from the beginning. And I have one special analogy for that, which is Magic the Gathering. In case you don't know what it is, it's a trading card game almost as old as SuperMemo in the early 90s, and is still relevant today. And what happened with Magic the Gathering is that, okay, you have creators, spells, artifacts, and so on and so on. And there are some colors have one playing style, and so on. But there are so many collections, so many different cards, that the game becomes very increasingly difficult. For instance, if one new user wants to play the Vintage or Legacy, that's the style that you can use almost every card. It increases the difficulty because there's been like 20,000 cards released. So you lose the incrementalism. All users, as in SuperMemo, have been introduced incrementally new theaters and to learn those. But if I start from scratch using SuperMemo 18, then I think, in my opinion, it's harder because there are more theaters available. So the sheer volume is increasing the difficulty of the game. That's why they made different styles. So you could only play with the releases of the last 2 years and so on. So it narrows down the complexity in that sense. And later on, they decided to make the rules even easier because they focus on newcomers, because their focus is on profit. So next question is that how the user weights different weaknesses of SuperMemo, because obviously SuperMemo is not perfect. There are some caveats and some weaknesses. For instance, it's only available on Windows, or there's no online functionality. It could be convenience, for instance. If I want to swap to another computer, when I'm not at home, I want to use my laptop or even the phone. So I think there's a tolerance from the user that could increase or decrease the difficulty. It could perhaps exist one person that never used Windows, especially if it's very young. Let's say that only used Mac. Then that person will have to get used to Windows to begin with. So it's adding more difficulty. Or even if the user chooses a workaround, like a virtual environment, this is adding more difficulty. And also what I think is also the layout is adding more difficulty, especially for new users and young users who never experienced the old software in the 90s. Is, oh, this layout is kind of old. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's adding difficulty to new users because they are used to using phones and very easy and intuitive layouts. Okay, let's go. Another question is, we have to distinguish hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills is know how to use this software, SuperMemo, how to use CSS or HTML, etc. And soft skills is, okay, how you use SuperMemo for actually learning or for problem solving or for creativity. This is even harder, and it's a prerequisite if you want to increase your creativity or using your creativity to solve problems. First, you have to master the hard skills of SuperMemo. You cannot start right away or do both at the same time. I like one quote from one Spanish saying that more or less in English would be that the devil knows more for being old than for being the devil. This means that the experience gathered across all the years he lived overweights the raw intelligence. I think this is kind of inspiring of SuperMemo because I guess some people will tend to think, oh, SuperMemo is for the smart people. No. Actually, the intelligence is not that relevant in SuperMemo or in incremental reading. You just need to give it a thought, to reflect on your own ideas, your own learning. But this is a skill, and that is what makes it hard. And for instance, myself, actually in the 90s, I learned how to use software by just pure trial and error. I had no access to the internet. There were no documents or manuals. So I was just messing around with the layout, the menus, what's doing that, and so on, and learning by doing so. And I think SuperMemo is that complex, or at least there are certain features that complex, that you won't get how it's done by just trial and error. You will have to read the documentation for that. Or perhaps you could reach that point by yourself by reinventing the wheel, but it will take way too long, into years. Okay, let's keep up. Effects on user personality. Does the personality of the person, the user, affects the perceived difficulty? What I have seen in the SuperMemo community is that some personality traits are overrepresented. This tendency can be perceived, can be understood, as there are certain personality traits that are more suitable to use SuperMemo. For instance, introversion, the openness to experience. Starting SuperMemo and having the patience, you have to be patient because the reward is not immediate and it's not even short term. It's like weight loss. You have to keep going to see the results, but you will have to wait some weeks to notice the first pounds you're losing, right? Same with SuperMemo. So some personality traits, in that sense, some personality traits make the experience harder. If the person is more impulsive, if it doesn't have that much patience. I want to speak for other people, so if I put myself on an example, I generally think my personality is very suitable for SuperMemo or incremental reading. I have lots of patience. I'm very open to experience. I like to experiment, to try, to learn. I accept defeating my own beliefs, the cognitive dissonance, and so on and so on. For me, it's not a problem to put on time, effort, hours into learning something, or to learn by myself. It's okay, I know I have the documentation, but let me try for myself. I want to experiment. Let's see how it is, right? That's my personality. And I think those personality traits increases the chances, first, to keep going using SuperMemo until you get more proficient. And second, to not give up. Because if the person is very impulsive, it's very likely that person will give up SuperMemo. Another thing I want to comment is the community. That was not available before. Now with the internet, we have small communities, groups of people who can learn how to use SuperMemo, the software, can ask very specific questions and get feedback in real time or in very short period of time using Discord, Reddit, or other sources. Before, in the 90s, there was a forum, I think, or the SuperMemopedia, but you need time to wait and wait to an answer. So now it's easier than before because you don't get stuck in time. You can get going pretty quickly, especially at the beginning, which the questions could be hard for the user, but user for myself, which have been using SuperMemo for longer than half a year, those questions are very easy. So long story short is that with the community, with help, with pals, peers, you can flatten the learning curve, especially at the beginning. So you see things more clear when you are not alone. Because if you fail some trial and error or you don't see things, you can just ask for help and get help pretty quickly and get feedback. And this is mutual. By providing feedback, you can also learn. I think there are some things that transcend SuperMemo. They acquire better habits and the new habits to acquire. I will start for the new habits. Is you need to understand the concept of incrementalism. And in case you're not a new user of speed repetition, you come from another app like me, you will, okay, I'm used to do this and that, but okay, so now I don't do the constellations right away. I do them incrementally. That's the habit you have to acquire. I'm used to read the text from top to bottom. Nope, you're going to do that incrementally. That's the habit to acquire. And this transcends the software. It's not related to SuperMemo, but incremental reading, incremental learning. So this, in my opinion, this is making SuperMemo harder, more difficult to learn. Because you don't only need to learn the software, the hard skill, also some of the soft skills, and make them a new habit. And on point of that, you have to get rid of all bad habits, which is especially true. You are not familiar with selecting your own sources, your own material for learning, how to prioritize. And I have one message, and there's one quote, slightly paraphrased from Bruce Lee, that I loved. And I think in SuperMemo, there's no single solution. Everyone has one unique solution that fits the best for his or her particular need. So as what Bruce Lee said is that research your own experience with SuperMemo. Absorb what's useful for you, because what's useful for me perhaps is not for you. And reject what is useless for you. Make your own experience and add what is especially your own. Make the experience the best possible for yourself. That's the beauty. Your learning experience will be extremely optimized and extremely personalized, customized for you, for your brain. And this also is not static. That will be changing, shifting in time, long life. I hope I inspired you. Feel free to voice your opinion. And see you next time.